And let's get more reaction to this news this morning. I'm joined by Misha Coleman, Executive Officer of the Australian Churches Refugee Taskforce, who joins us live from Melbourne. Misha, thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Liz.
The government has long maintained that asylum seekers who come here by boat would never be settled in Australia, but the introduction of a lifetime ban on all visas, this does seem much tougher than expected. What, in your view, are the likely consequences if this legislation is passed?
Liz, it's a very sad day for Australia, to be honest. There seems to be no plan that this government has to deal with the 3,000 people who are withering away on Nauru and Manus Island. And either Mr Turnbull doesn't have a plan or he can't get support for some sort of an alternative. The consequences are twofold. So firstly, for those people who are in Australia right now, so people, a lot of young families who have very small children for whom the environments on Nauru are just too hostile, for kids who have sort of illnesses, or women who've had to, be removed for their own protection, for men who have had to come to Australia because the conditions and especially the medical facilities on Manus Island are so problematic. For all of those people who are currently here in Australia, they really face deportation and, kids being ripped out of schools, women going back to, potentially very, very dangerous and violent situations. Secondly, for people who, you imagine a refugee who is, finds a country that will take him or her as a resettled refugee, who goes on to become a brilliant academic, a brilliant scholar, a surgeon who could potentially, save lives through a new technology. That person can't even get a tourist visa or a business permit or a work visa. So it is the most draconian type of response from a government that is grasping at straws. And I suppose the timing, one has to be a little cynical, Liz, about the timing. So we're about to enter the final sitting weeks of the year. We have a new Senate makeup post the double dissolution, and I guess this will be the first piece of legislation introduced that really does test the convictions or otherwise of the new Senate members around offshore processing in particular.
Well, I mean, we are yet to see whether Labor will support this legislation or not. We heard from Brendan O'Connor this morning on Sky News saying he wants to have a look at it before declaring a position, but we know that Labor has really been in bipartisan support in this area in the past. So
That's right.
If it does, then you're right, it will end up in the hands of the crossbench to decide. So I guess we'll see that next week. But the Greens are claiming that this legislation is contrary to international law. Will you be pushing for a case to be made that this does go against Australia's legal obligations?
We're not aware that there is any other jurisdiction on the planet that has measures such as these. So, yes, there needs to be, an understanding of compliance with international law, but let's face it, Liz, we are breaking international human rights law, the Refugee Convention, pretty much every day of the year right now. Every time a boat is turned back summarily at sea, and especially where people on those boats are returned to their countries of origin. So, the government is saying at the moment one boat is coming a month. It may or may not be true. Of course, there's no transparency. But for those people who are being returned to Sri Lanka, to Vietnam, that is an absolute and flagrant violation of a whole range of international conventions and laws to which Australia is a signatory. So, we are busy breaking international law in an ongoing way, and have been doing so for many years in this country.
The Prime Minister says that this legislation is needed to send a strong message to people smugglers, that that's why they need to be so tough in this approach. But it does seem a little bit unusual given the government's saying that its current boat turn back policy is already working.
Well, that's right. We're consistently told that, it's under control and the deaths at sea have stopped and all of the other rhetoric, which frankly is, I think most Australian Australians are really tired of this rhetoric. Why now? If things are under control, why introduce some of the most draconian legislation imaginable, if not for any other reason but to shore up your own sort of political sort of fortunes? We know that, you know, this government is on a knife edge. It has very, very poor support. Mr Turnbull himself has poor support. But really, let's bring it back to the kids, the mums, the dads sitting in Adelaide in a suburb who are just trying to get on with their lives. Let's think about, you know, those women and kids in tents that are, well, you know, just absolutely withering away physically, emotionally. Let's think about them and what we need to do for those people, as opposed to what a few sort of political mileage points might be gained. There is a better way. There are alternatives. The Australian Human Rights Commission has put together a very, very comprehensive plan. The Churches Refugee Taskforce will also be releasing an alternatives plan together with Get Up in a couple of weeks. So it's not like there are not other options out there. We just need this government and Mr Shorten to sit down and have a look at a better way.
OK, Misha Coleman, Executive Officer of the Australian Churches Refugee Taskforce. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon and for your reaction to this news.
Thanks, Liz.
And we are expecting to hear more on this from the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, very shortly. He's due to hold a doorstop, so we'll bring you that as soon as it comes in. Moving on for now, though, the FBI's criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email servers continues after thousands of additional emails were found on another device. But it's likely to be after the election before there is any news on what, if anything, was in those emails.